Thank you, Ashley. Welcome everyone to this month's Twinmotion session. Um, for those of you that have joined them in the past, welcome back. And for those of you that are new, uh, welcome. So just a couple of things here before I get into demo. Um, my name is Vince Daniele. I'm a building solutions team lead here at Imagine. I've been with the company for 11 years. And I also am the technical lead for our partnership with Epic Games and Twinmotion. Um, prior to my experience with Twinmotion, I've got 18 years of experience in ArcViz, going all the way back to ArcViz with Architectural Desktop, and I am based out of Detroit. So today's topic is leveraging your Revit models using Twinmotion. And the reason I thought this was a good topic for a presentation for this month is I actually had a customer that I did some work with, and they had a specific project that they needed help with. And in going through the process of creating the presentation that they were looking for, I had to go through some pretty, maybe not super advanced, but some pretty good workflow issues or workflows to actually get the model set up the way that I needed to create the animations and selection sets and things in Twinmotion. Um, so yeah, getting into it. Basically, a few of the main topics or things that I'll cover today. I'm first going to go through Revit and talk about the Datasmith integration into Revit. So if you're not aware, there are Datasmith plugins for a number of different programs that are on the market. Revit, Navisworks, 3ds Max, ArchiCAD, SketchUp are a few of them. I think there's a couple of more. I can direct everyone to the webpage for the direct links at the end. But the Datasmith plugins, it's a plugin where we can package up and create a special file format that is a really nice file package. It is one, I guess it's considered a U-Datasmith, but that U-Datasmith can travel between Twinmotion and the Unreal Engine. And like I mentioned, it can be produced from all of those supporting pieces of software applications. So really, if you're an Autodesk user, think of it as like the Unreal or the Epic Games version of the FBX file. It's really just a nice packaged up file. There's a little bit more to it than just what an FBX has, but it's the primary focus on how we're going to move these objects and elements from Revit and then into Navisworks and then into Twinmotion. So I'll go right into it. I've just started with one of our basic sample projects here from Revit. So everyone that has Revit installed has access to the same model. It's just one of the sample data sets that comes with Revit through the sample files here. So this one is the advanced sample project for architecture. It's a school project, and there are supporting MEP files. So if you're looking to kind of test out what I'm showing today, and you have Revit, you'll have access to these same files. So the things I'm going to show you won't be any surprise to you once you get into practice this on your own. So a couple of things. First off, I do have the Datasmith plugin installed in Revit, and it's a pretty simple plugin. Revit actually does have some added functionality that when we get into Navisworks doesn't have, and I'll explain that. But you can see there are only a few different buttons in here in this tab for Datasmith, and the primary focus for this presentation is going to be exporting. I know in the past I've gone through the process of direct link, and if I have time at the end, I'll just kind of go through that again, because I think it was the middle of last year, Epic Games released the Datasmith plugin to take place of the direct link, which is this tab here. So if you're still using this Twinmotion direct link plugin, you should probably get rid of it or uninstall it. I know I still have it on my computer, but all of the work I've been doing lately with Twinmotion in synchronizing models has been done through this Datasmith tab. There were some glitches and issues with the direct link where when we would export or synchronize, certain artifacts and objects inside of Revit were just disappearing randomly when you bring them into Twinmotion. And a number of our customers reached out or still reach out to us saying that they export their Revit models and things aren't there that should be there. And then I'll go through and troubleshoot, and I can't figure out, there's no rhyme or reason to why certain objects are gone. I think it's the one thing I could maybe think of is that it was like a glazing material or glass material was causing issues, but it would only do it on certain families. So you could have two windows and one window would be gone, even though they would be the same window type. It was just very odd behavior. But normally the solution that I first recommend is install the Datasmith plugin, stop using the direct link. And that usually takes care of any of the major issues with geometry export. So anyways, to explain the whole idea behind taking our Revit models, bringing them into Twinmotion, using the export function, really what you see is what you get on your screen. So if you're in a 3D view, and you do have to be in some form of a 3D view when you go to export to a Datasmith. If you have certain Revit categories isolated or certain categories turned off, when you do go to export your 3D view, it will simply ignore the objects that are turned off and it won't package them up in the Datasmith. So that's kind of powerful in itself. This is the site has some topo. I assume with this one we've got a section box turned on that's actually limiting the amount of topography that we're seeing. So the section box actually does influence what's exported as well. If we start to section things down, or for the sake of creating a 3D section in Twinmotion, maybe you want to section your building in 3D, you can use these section boxes in Revit, export them out while that view is active, and it will just export what you see on your screen. So it does export that active section. So there's some power in that, even just getting into Revit categories in general. Sometimes these RPC objects, I know for this file, if we were to export this directly into Twinmotion, these kind of cardboard looking RPC trees would show up like cardboard trees when you do the export. So sometimes, it might make sense to turn those off. I actually like to, leverage these trees as almost like a proxy object when we get into Twinmotion. So first off, with what I have on my screen here, I kind of sectioned this off. Let me bring in a little bit more of that topo in the front there. That was there to begin with. Not that it really matters, I guess, but with that all sort of showing this slice of land in the building here, when you go to export, there's just a few settings that you have to be aware of. And really, it's all on the Twinmotion import. So when you go to export this, you're just naming the file, arc model, call it here. I'll save it to, I set up a little folder to quickly get to. So just calling this arc model, export Datasmith. I'll underscore Revit because I'm going to do a couple of other things later. So I exported from Revit to a Datasmith file. And then inside of Twinmotion, we have the ability to just simply take that arc model that I created from Revit and open it. Now, in the past, we talked about different preferred file formats. This Datasmith is one that's in here now, so we can just open the Datasmith directly. We don't have to do anything to it. But the options I wanted to mention on the Twinmotion side, when we export out from Revit, it can maintain element hierarchy based on Revit family categories and then the naming conventions of the different families. Or we can collapse everything by material. I prefer to keep the element hierarchy that Revit creates instead of combining everything by material. Really easy example of this is in Revit, say all of your windows and curtain walls have the glass material assigned to them. If we collapse by material, then all of those glass objects would then only be selectable as one object if you use this collapse by material. And then the third option is collapse all, which actually just groups everything together into one object, which is usually not a workflow that you're going to use unless for some reason there's a Revit object that you just wanted to basically make one element that can only have one material. I prefer to keep the hierarchy most of the time. And then basically beyond that, if there's any weird issues, I don't think that Revit really has, I haven't seen any major issues between the fixed UV texture or this doing anything by turning this on. So I just keep the default, turn that off, and then our unit conversion is set to automatic. If you uncheck that, you can set a scale factor, but most of the time, auto works just fine, especially if you're using feet and inches in Revit and feet and inches in Twinmotion or metric in metric. So anyway, export, I talked about how you could turn the different objects off. And then what you see is what you get. So when we bring this into Twinmotion as a simple, oh cool, brought us right on top of the building, you'll see that it does import basically everything that we saw in our Revit model. Now, the one thing I want to point out here, and I think the major point of focus for this presentation is when we get our Revit model into Twinmotion, this hierarchy can be kind of a lot to digest because every Revit element creates a little, they call these containers in Twinmotion, and then in those containers we have the actual element. So we can select things like these curtain walls, and each panel shows up as its own element. One quick way to kind of clean up or to make the scene graph easier to read, you can right click anywhere in the scene graph and collapse the hierarchy of the scene graph. And if we go to the very top, so I'm just scrolling all the way to the top to our import, which was our ARC model, just right click over it, collapse that hierarchy, and then it breaks it down so everything is collapsed. As you can see, it makes it a little bit easier to select things, but you still notice that, with railings, we've got all of these different containers. There's really not a great organization to the way that this is broken down within this hierarchy. The only other option coming directly from Revit, the way this would break down, is if we did collapse by material, then we would just have all of the Revit materials that are assigned as selectable objects. But as I mentioned before, it doesn't really give us great control over our models. Oops, slow this down a little bit, because I don't want all of my curtain walls and window glazing, to be the same object. What if I wanted to make some of the windows tinted and some of them not? We would have to make sure that in Revit we have different materials assigned to them, and it just becomes a real pain to start to really make the models manageable and organize them. So without opening up Revit, the second thing I want to show you, and this is what I kind of figured out in the process of the project that I used before, especially with curtain walls, because a curtain wall or any really system in Revit, whether it's stairs, curtain walls, even certain wall assemblies and things that have multiple sweeps, technically in Revit, they're kind of one element with many parts built into them. When it comes into Twinmotion, they're individual elements. So it's very difficult to create a selection specifically of maybe a certain row of the glazing and mullions on level 1, or certain elements within the model. You really have to become an expert at sort of sifting through the scene graph and selecting them individually, or holding the control key down and selecting multiple elements. it just becomes very difficult to keep up with the organization. One thing you are able to do in Twinmotion, if you wanted to take the time to organize these current containers and simplify them into a way that's a bit more manageable, if you right click in the scene graph, you are able to create new containers, which just basically creates a new group, and you can drag and drop things into those groups. It just, it is going to take you a long time, especially when a lot of the elements are sort of embedded into these current containers to clean stuff up. So what I found is that just knowing how Navisworks deals with selection sets and really breaks apart the model from Revit, I'm able to create a much more simplified version of the scene graph in a way that makes a lot more sense to the way that we would work. Or if you're looking to break down certain elements and make them more easily selectable, Navisworks is a really nice sort of middle ground to break your model up to organize it for Twinmotion. So with that, I just want to show with Navisworks. So I did set a file up, an NWC, that had some selection sets already predefined, but when I just restarted, I just closed everything without saving really quick. So yeah, there we go. And it gave me that. Oh, cool. It opened up my last session. Nice. So I didn't lose anything. Good job, Navisworks. So I was going to show how I exported this, but ultimately it's the same export. I just used the Navisworks plugin to export to an NWC file to open this up in Navisworks. So in Revit, exported to NWC to get the simplified, or not simplified, but the cache model into Navisworks. And you can see that in Navisworks, I have the Unreal Datasmith tab here because I have the plugin installed in Navisworks as well. So the one thing I find that is really useful when you're getting into these complicated models where you're trying to break up things and make them a little bit easier, or not a little bit, a lot easier to use and navigate in Twinmotion, is we can use the power of Navisworks to create specific selection sets. A hierarchy in Navisworks is very similar to what we're seeing in Twinmotion in the scene graph. It's really complicated, but Navisworks has a number of different controls that make selecting objects from our Revit models much easier than Twinmotion does natively. For one, we have a selection window, which you don't have in Twinmotion. So you can kind of do, a big group or a selection window around a number of objects, save it to a selection set, and then export them out. So kind of going through this process really quickly, just a really quick breakdown. Maybe we want to isolate some windows here on level 1. So one nice way that we can do this in Navisworks is we select, back to my pick selector. I might select one window, and then up in Navisworks, we can say select the same type. All of those windows are selected. And if we're fine with that, if we want all of those windows to just be one nice selection set on the side of the building, then all you have to do is save that to a selection set. And this looks like it's the, we'll just call this the east side. So I'll just call those windows east. And then really what I like to do is I'll start just exporting pieces of this model based on these selection sets that we accumulate. So selecting Windows East, we hide unselected. This is one thing, just like with Revit, it's when you go to export, it's what you see is what you get. So we don't want to export, even if the windows are the only thing that's selected, but everything is turned on. When you go to export the Datasmith, so if I went to this level, just open up my Datasmith, which, oh no, is this on my other monitor? Hold on a second. I pulled this over to the other monitor earlier. There it is. All right. So playing with fire here. Turn that back off. So the Datasmith plugin, we can set an origin I like to just maintain the same origin point, so I don't really mess around with this unless there's a major reason to, because it is going to use this origin to create the pivot point, which I guess some might argue, well, we want our pivot point to be near the windows, not on the zero origin, way far away from them. Well, that's fine, but in coordinating all of these elements, if we start to export these out, we want to maintain the same pivot, or else you're going to try to manually align things up in Twinmotion, and it's just kind of defeats the whole purpose of this process. There's another thing here for merge. Merge last nth objects in hierarchy. So I have this set to 1, which means it's going to take these model elements and basically create the same folder structure all the way down to that last element when you go to export. You can increase this number, and what it starts to do is group things in kind of a easier way to view them in Twinmotion. So less depth or less steps to your selection tree. Setting it to 1 is going to give you basically the same selection tree, but if we wanted to start to collapse these elements down, we can increase this number. Let's just go to 3 and see how that works. So before I go to export this, just change this back to hide unselected. So I just have my windows. So I call that, name the selection set Windows East, go to export this. Just to keep everything consistent, I like to name my export files the same as I do my selection sets. So just keeping a nice organized workflow here. Windows East, save that, and then getting into Twinmotion. Let me reset my scene here. When you go to import, simply select, keep the hierarchy, and you can see that comes in really nicely. It collapsed everything up to the 3rd level, which actually was just the project name. We could even delete that container out. I'll just keep it because the whole point is now I've got this nice organized way of getting to this element, and there are the objects. So it's like our glazing did come through. Okay, good. You kind of see. Yep, all right. I wasn't sure for a second there if the glass is there, but it is there. So start to really tint it. All right, cool. So in going through this in a really large project, using some of the tricks for Navisworks to split the model up, the thing you do have to be careful of is if you're going through this process, if I do an unhide all, and then I want to just really export most of the building minus my selection sets, one thing I will do before you export, you want to make sure that you grab all of your selection sets and hide them. Otherwise, you're going to get double objects when you go to export. So it's just kind of, or even just selecting the inverse. But I find this is really the way to go if we're trying to split the model up. We might have sort of a main chunk of the model. And the nice thing too is at some point, say you're going through and breaking your model up and you realize, oh, I wanted to actually separate these doors out from my main model. That's fine. All you have to do when you go to export, say, let me do that example really quickly. So I've got this main model. I'll go to export it through Datasmith. 3 levels is good. It collapses everything down so I don't get these additional containers. And I'll just call this, main building. I suppose I could have created a selection set for the main building, but just to show you this here, now when I go back into Twinmotion and import it, glass, yeah. It's just saying there's duplicates, so there's already glass material, so we'll just use the scene material instead of duplicating any materials. And there we go. See, everything aligns because I used the same origin. I didn't bring in the curtain walls because those are part of a different selection set, although it does look like some weird glazing. I wonder if my model has like a duplicate in there or something, but splitting that up, and actually this would be probably pretty easy to find those objects if for some reason it brought in some weird, oh, okay. There were some rooms. I forgot about that. If rooms are in your Revit model, they do come in as objects, which is a little bit odd. So one thing you would want to do in Navisworks is find those rooms and probably just delete them out of the Navisworks model, or hide them, because yeah, you can see there's some weird like room objects in here. So I would probably grab that from Navis, select all the same type, and just hide them. You can't delete, but make sure you would hide the room objects. And so anyway, if we wanted to add something later on, or if we get to a point where you're trying to update the file, so I'm gonna hide the selection. Say we're doing something where we want to isolate our doors and remove them from our main model, so make them a new selection set. What I would simply do here is select all the same type of doors, create a new selection set for the doors, hide that, or sorry, hide that, and actually just hide all of this stuff. And then, with the doors turned off, we can go back to our Unreal Datasmith, export this out as the main building again. So that it updates. One thing I did find through this process is that with this, it's really best, we can try to refresh this. Oh, actually that worked out. So there we go, it worked. Refresh it and it removed the doors. What I was finding in the past, maybe this was updated, if I refreshed it, it wasn't always giving me the update to the Datasmith file that was exported. So I'd end up having to delete and then re-import, which kind of stunk because if you had any materials assigned, you'd have to go back through them again. But it looks like they've fixed that issue, and you can just refresh your Datasmith and then it updates. So, ultimately that's the big idea behind organizing. You can see that I do have some different selection sets created. So let's do unhide all, hide unselected to isolate the site. So, got the site file. One really cool thing I wanted to show everyone is, all of this stuff was created in Revit. So I mentioned earlier using trees as sort of a proxy object. I'm going to export the site out, which I already had, but I'll replace it. And then back in Twinmotion, import the site. So bring it in. So you can see, we get those really crummy looking trees in here. I've probably mentioned this before in different presentation. Well, let's see, does it break it down? One thing you have to be careful of from Navisworks, I merged too many levels of the trees. So now all of these scarlet oak tree types are seen as one object rather than separate trees. So just really quick back here, let's make sure we go to one level. It's a good example, to show how that can be good, can be bad. But just by doing that and then refreshing my site, why are those now? Maybe this is a good example of, let's see, delete it here. I'll just re-import really quick. Maybe I had to do Oh, that should be right. If this doesn't work, I do have a separate file for the trees. So yeah, that's weird. Still selecting them all as a single object. Odd. Let me delete all of my planting out, and then I'll import. There we go. So something in my settings, I'm not going to worry too much. You can see here, this has a longer level of hierarchy where there's a container for these. And this was exported from Navis, so I must have just had, maybe I did collapse my material by mistake. But with these individual trees, if we want to use the power of Twinmotion to replace them with real objects, when we click on the main level of the container file in the hierarchy, Scarlet Oak, it doesn't look like it, but all of those Scarlet Oak trees are selected, and we can right click over the container, choose to replace objects, and then I can go into my library, find a normal tree that I want to replace it with. Or you could pick, actually, you could pick a couple of different ones if you want to randomly replace them. So I've got 2 trees selected here, start replacement, and it swaps them out, with Twinmotion trees. So really quick way, again, just leveraging the Revit model. We can go through a number of the different trees. If you wanted to randomize all of your trees, you can just hold the control button down and select multiple containers in the scene graph. But you would just go through this process to start to replace those objects. One that I did set up. So one final thing I'll show you here. I feel like this is a really, really good one if you're doing a lot of interior lighting or you're using, again, leveraging your Revit objects to create a nice Twinmotion scene. One thing that we can't do, or one thing that Twinmotion doesn't do when you export from Revit is bring the light source information, the IES files with your light fixtures. So you can manually place lighting components, Twinmotion light objects over all of your fixtures, but it is going to take you a really long time, especially in this school project that has a ton of different recessed lights and pendant lights. So one trick or one workaround that I came up with is using this replace object method. Let me see if I did have, I believe I do have if I did this right. Cool. I have a whole NWC lighting file that should align up to this. So I'm going to merge that into my scene. We still have all of these room objects. Maybe when you export from Revit, make sure that actually those rooms were hidden. So you're probably just going to have to hide those objects, when you export. But I've got all of these different light fixtures. So let me pick on this one. This is metric, so it's 600 by 600, 277 light. Using that same method, I'll select all of the light types, hide unselected to isolate my lights. Now we can start going through, probably using some selection methods right here in Navisworks. I can start to use selection windows, or pick by holding control, pick individual lights like this. What I'm getting at here is I can isolate all of my light objects first off. I like going into an orthographic view for this. And just for the sake of making this quick, selection box, and try to just do a really tight selection box over most of these 600 by 600s here. I think I grabbed a couple of pendants, but that's okay. Save a new selection set. I'll call this LTG for lighting, LV4 for level, or actually it's level 3, so LV3. And now I have this selection set isolated. So hide my unselected. If I just wanted all of these, I could come back here and remove these from it, but I won't waste any more time with that. Let's go into Datasmith, export this, and we'll just call this one LTG LV3. Okay. I know this is kind of getting in deep in the process, but I think going through this, it's going to really help you out when you're getting into these more detailed models where you're really starting to break things up. So I'll bring that file in, and we probably can't see most of them. You know, they're inside the rooms. I'll just assume that all of my lighting objects came in, and I can scroll up in my scene graph, collapse everything down, and there we go. We've got this lighting level. It's weird. Some of these must be assigned to some weird stuff from the Revit model, but in level 3, probably all of these objects, or at least, here's all these 277s. We can use that same method of copying them, or I'm not sorry, of replacing them. But before I do that, when we export the selection set, we obviously want to maintain the geometry that comes in, especially for things like the pendant lights that zoom into the building here. You know, we don't want those pendants to go away. So a little trick here is we can click on the main level. You can either do this directly in place. What I found, you know, with downlighting especially, what makes sense is if you just copy it really slightly in the Z direction. So got the gizmo here. All of these lights are selected. Just holding the shift key and moving this. I don't know if you can see in the building, but I'm actually copying the lights down in the Z axis. So I'm creating a duplicate of them. I want to just make this a copy. You can adjust the spacing. So if we just wanted to copy down an inch or something, you know, we could do like 1/12, or I'll just do 0.1 of a foot. Actually, I have to be negative 0.1. Let's see. It knows the direction, so no negative, just 0.1. All right, so that's just below the light fixtures. So it's still selected. Now what you can do is using the same idea, I don't know where it copied, to duplicate all of those. Yeah, we should have 2 folders here now. So you see the original one and then my copy down here below it. So what I want to do is probably right away just rename this something that makes sense, like objects. And now with that copy, we do a replace object. We decide whatever IES file we want to replace those the physical objects with. I'll just find some type of downlight, start the replacement, and with that, now we've got all of these downlights from our physical objects. It looks like these ones are all flipped in the wrong direction, which is weird, but you know, we can go through and grab, especially if they were copied as instances, you could grab one and rotate them. You probably wouldn't want to do the entire floor of the building like I just did. It'd probably be smart to start to isolate them in, you know, by light type in their different groups. But that alone, I think, you know, isolating the selection, importing it in, what we're doing there is we're really just creating a proxy object in order to create a light object in its place, you know, without removing the physical geometry. So couple step workflow. And then one last thing, and really the reason I got into this level of breaking everything down in the first place in the project that I was working in is that there was a need to do phasing. So we had to do phasing and show construction phasing in the building, and breaking it down into those more manageable chunks. We were actually able to, easily group things together based on its construction, and then in your phasing timeline, you can just really easily isolate a selection. So just like these windows here, I can isolate that selection. Essentially, that's now assigned to this phase. And you can group things to specific phases like that. So it just made it a lot easier to manage a very complicated timeline for phasing by grouping these things together. I can create a new phase, maybe move this over. You could even make it in the same track, but then new phase, maybe we want the main building to turn on. So we would click on this phase, make sure that the building's turned on. Oops. Should be able to select this. Oh, I have to get out of my isolate mode. So let's just do it this way. So phase 1, those are turned on. Phase 2, both the windows are turned on. So, with phasing, then we're creating this little phasing timeline where, not that you would ever have your windows installed before the walls, but you can see how that's controlling the visibility. And then in combination, if you have an overall visibility state where the entire building is turned on, you can still utilize scene states. This was kind of the old version of doing phasing in Twinmotion. I find this really useful. As you're getting through a lot of complicated phasing, you're going back and forth between, showing something at a certain phase, and then maybe I want to turn the whole building on really quickly, and you're jumping out of this phase mode. Having a scene state saved to show existing versus new construction, where existing would just have everything basically turned off except for maybe the site. Saving those to a scene state is really helpful. So maybe turn off everything except for my site initially. I call that a scene state, rename it site, and it kind of gives you a nice little bookmark to get back to that visibility state outside of the phasing timeline. We could do the same thing with building, then turn everything on and call that state final, and then just jumping between these. It's a quick way. Phasing does a similar thing, but it's more tied into that sort of overall timeline. The scene states are nice because it's almost like a layer visibility or a view template that you would use in Revit just to turn things on or off very quickly. So